So, let's talk about Antifa. The idea of anti-fascism and the collective organization of Antifa are very much not the same thing. Now, I haven't seen anyone make this specific argument yet, but they also do not make the specific distinction, probably because they just assume that people know this. I just want to make clear that this is something that is the case. And I don't mean that Antifa isn't anti-fascist, because it very much is anti-fascist. In the context of separating Antifa from anti-fascism as an idea, it's very easy to fall into the trap of, what do you mean you are opposed to my anti-fascist organization? You must therefore be a fascist. But that's a little bit like a Nazi saying, what do you mean you are against my anti-exploitation of Germans organization? That means you must be pro the exploitation of the German people. That is a problem with many politically extreme organizations. They do not wear on their sleeve what they stand for, but instead they wear on their sleeve what they stand against. And if you are against something, it is very easy to make a lot of allies who are also against that thing, who might otherwise not agree with anything you ever say at all. This is how dangerous and potentially dangerous organizations hide within "we are against this bad thing" movements, much like the alt-right has been hidden in anti-identitarianism. Many of the people watching this video will consider themselves to be anti-identitarians. I know I do. So, because it's easy, I will use that group as an example. People who do believe in identity politics, let's call them identitarians, will lump Sargon of Akkad, Stephen Crowder, Jordan Peterson, and the Amazing Atheist into the very same camp, as if these four people were essentially ideologically identical and believed in the very same things. And of course, the things that all of them believe are what the worst among them believe. Yet, if you are even somewhat familiar with any two of these four people, you will realize that they have opinions that differ so widely that they are sometimes even diametrically opposed to each other. The only thing that they have in common is that they are anti-identity politics. For example, Ben Shapiro and Kyle Kulinski are both anti-identitarians. They are both anti-identity politics, yet they are incredibly different in literally every single thing that they believe. You can be against identity politics because you believe it is a pointless and reductionist ideology instrumentalized by corporations for PR reasons, or you can be against identity politics because you hate women and minorities. The same is true for anti-fascists. You can be an anti-fascist because you believe that fascism is a dangerous ideology and needs to be defeated in the court of public opinion. Or you can be an anti-fascist because you want to restore the glory of the Soviet Union. This also includes the irony of being the precise thing that you are fighting against, like the anti-identitarian who is actually a white nationalist, or the anti-fascist who actually wants a secret police to root out all its political opponents, which is the same thing that a fascist would do. I am of the opinion that many anti-identitarians have been doing to the anti-fascists what the anti-fascists have been doing to us, meaning they are lumping them all into the same category, even if they have opinions and views that are vastly distinct from each other. I consider myself to be an anti-fascist. I also consider myself to be an anti-identitarian. I believe these two things go hand in hand. I am, however, not a member of Antifa. Not because I disagree with their overall idea of fighting fascism, but because I disagree with their methods. Instead of fighting fascists with words and discourse and public discussion as you ought to, the most vocal and powerful elements of Antifa engage in political violence or in the condoning of political violence, which is extremely dangerous. The thing once again being that Antifa isn't a singular organization, it is a very diverse group composed of many different organizations with sometimes diametrically opposed opinions who share a common goal. That goal being that they want to protect the world from fascists, even if they have very different methods of doing so. There are communist groups in Antifa, there are socialist groups in Antifa, there are environmentalist groups in Antifa, there are free speech absolutist groups in Antifa, there are anti-white groups in Antifa, there are egalitarian groups in Antifa. I know that American Antifa is a lot less diverse than German Antifa because it's a distillate of German Antifa that was imported into certain aspects of American society, but that also means that American Antifa is a whole lot less effective and a whole lot less scary than German Antifa. Antifa, because when they put you on a list, you actually have reason to be concerned. There are, in German Antifa especially, considering the historical context under which the organizations were created, many pro-Jewish groups in Antifa. And something that might surprise some is that there are also many anti-Muslim groups in Antifa, because Muslims have historically been very much anti-Jewish. And that is even though there are also many pro-Muslim groups in Antifa, because, much like Kyle Kulinski and Ben Shapiro, many groups within Anti-Fascism and Antifa as an organization are diametrically opposed to each other. Really, the problem is the political violence. And in order to keep the group together and to make the group strong, to unite all of these people under one label that is anti-something, that something that they are anti-against must exist, and it must be relatively powerful. It is thus in the interest of every single element in the group, because every single element in the group is reinforced by every other element in the group so long as they are working together, to summon the specter of that very thing they proclaim to be fighting against. So they will see fascists where there are none, and then go there and attack the fascists, because the idea of the most extreme elements within Antifa, which are of course the ones who are most effective at doing what they do, is that you need to use violence to defeat fascists. But the thing is, with humans, we are much more willing to empathize with the people who are being punched than the people who are doing the punching. Thus, ironically, fighting fascists that do not exist will eventually create fascists. There are always some fascists somewhere. There are always real Nazis in some corner, even if it's just maybe a dozen. And though political violence does not necessarily make people believe new things, it will put people on edge. Believe it or not, a lot of people just haven't put a lot of thought into what they believe politically, because there are just not enough hours in the day to do that, and really, what am I going to change? I am just a farmer in rural Missouri. But at the point at which one group is enacting violence against another, they will see, holy shit, there is something happening here, I have to look into this, and probably they will take the side of the person who has been victimized, even if they at first do not agree with that person. The pole at which that person is, at which that organization or ideology is, will gain more followers. People just like to help other people they believe to be victimized, regardless of ideology. That is how all of these movements that have historically helped people who were actually victimized just happened in the first place. Eventually, the fascists created by Antifa will be powerful enough to strike back against Antifa, and then Antifa will be in the position that they have been victimized by political violence, because the fascists will say, hey, they attacked us, we must attack them, and so then they attack Antifa, and Antifa goes, hey, they have attacked us, we must defend ourselves against them. The more attacks against Antifa will make them believe that their violent methods of self-defense are justified, and more attacks against the fascists will make them believe that their violent methods of self-defense are justified. It's not that fascists or communists come out of the woodwork when such a thing goes on. It's that political polarization will increase people's readiness to take a side, even if that means compromising on the things that they themselves believe in. And there's nothing quite as effective at political polarization as political violence. The fascists are not going to say, help us because we are fascists. They are going to say, help us because we are being attacked. And Antifa will do much the same thing. They will not say, hey, help us because we have all these ideas. They will say, hey, help us because we are being attacked by the fascists. In times of increased political polarization, what a group or a person stands against becomes more important than what they stand for. People will do a lot of things in self-defense, so all you have to do is convince them that what you are doing is their self-defense, even if that means taking away the ability to speak from their political opponents or those who are not pure enough to be part of the organization you are part of. You see this within fascist organizations, you see this within anti-fascist organizations. And often the fascist organizations will not declare themselves to be fascist organizations, but anti-fascist organizations, whereas they put the anti-fascist organizations in the same camp as some ideology they consider to be dangerous. And in the end, both groups will be doing this. And the first people who lose out are the ones who are trying to not polarize the discussion, but defeat the others with words instead of fists. And this reverberation of political polarization through political violence eventually leads to totalitarian regimes. This is precisely how the Nazis took power in Germany. A lot of people like to believe that there were just Nazis at some point, and people liked what they had to say, and they said, yep, we're all Nazis now, we're going to vote for the Nazis, and now the Nazis are going to have power. But that's not what happened. In the Weimar Republic, communist groups were as powerful as the Nazi groups. Both of these groups helped each other out by declaring the other the enemy and dangerous to society, and thus they gained more followers and more people who agreed with their methods, until eventually the rules of the game was changed in such a way that no longer the most peaceful and rational party would win the day, but the party who was willing to go farthest. If you are willing to do violence against an enemy, and that enemy is not willing to do violence back to you, you will win. And if you are willing to do violence against an enemy of a group of organizations, and other groups within that group of organizations are not willing to do violence against that very same enemy group, you can easily paint them as being allies of the enemy group because they are less virtuous in fighting the enemy group. During this time of extreme political polarization, the Nazis didn't present themselves as "we are the Nazis, we want to kill the Jews," but "we are the Nazis, we want to defeat the communists." I mean, you know, what do you think is nicer on a dating profile? Adolf 41 wants to exterminate the Untermensch, or Adolf 41 wants to protect you from those violent communists? The whole socialist thing, in the name of the National Socialist Workers' Party, was to get on-the-fence socialists who didn't like the communists very much on board with the Nazis instead of the communists. And no, that does not make them a left-wing organization. If you actually believe that the Nazis were left-wing, you are so stupid that you must also believe that there are free and democratic elections in the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The Nazis actually kept all the Jew stuff very quiet at first. It is only once they had defeated the communists and gained a lot of power in the process by having people trust them as saviors that they were able to exploit the undercurrents of anti-Semitism that had historically existed in Germany to create the narrative of the Jew being the dark phantom and the rat who will steal your money and controls the international banking cartel. Only this time around, they were already so powerful and totalitarian that the enemy they created would forever remain a phantom. This is why, though I am an anti-fascist, I am opposed to Antifa as an organization. They use political violence to achieve their goals, and that political violence then creates Nazis, which will go the other way around, and that creates a downward spiral of political polarization that eventually leads to one extremist group coming out on top and everyone else losing. That is what has always happened historically. No matter how much they would like you to believe it, Antifa isn't the only thing standing between you and fascist violence. The only thing standing between you and fascist violence is the police. And all Antifa is doing is making fascist violence worse. When Antifa says that the police doesn't do enough, it is because the police does not take away the human rights of Nazis. Much like when right-wingers say that the police isn't doing enough against Antifa, that's because the police isn't taking away the rights of Antifa. To both factions in an environment of extreme political polarization, the victim narrative is incredibly important, and they could not exist if people realize that neither of them are actually oppressed and both are oppressing the other. The scariest thing about tyrannical governments is that though you can see them coming, you never know what it is going to be. You don't know which side is going to win, which specific ideology will emerge from the two groups that are anti the other and take control of the institutions. The point at which you can see it, it's already too late, because at that point they will have consolidated power and stabbed their former allies in the back. Let's hope it doesn't come to that this time around. Thank you very much for watching. Do all the usual things. You've been on YouTube for a while. Unless this is your very first YouTube video that you're watching, consider supporting me on Patreon for very cool rewards that you will be getting. Also, there is work is being done on merchandise. Join my Discord server, follow me on Twitter. I appreciate all of you. Don't let yourselves get polarized by either of the two opposing parties. Remain rational, remain individualist, remain anti-identitarian, and remain anti-fascist. And see you around, cunts.